Welcome back to the channel C1 Exam Preparation. My name's Paul. Today we're looking at reading specifically parts 5, 6, 7, and 8. We won't look at part 1 because that's really sort of closer to the sort of use of English, but it actually is part of the reading exam. But 5, 6, 7, and 8 is what we'll look at. We'll talk about how to do those particular parts, but also we'll look at time management because that is a key topic for this part of the exam. Okay, so let's get straight to it. So this is part 5. You can see that we have a long text here, okay? And the questions that we're going to look at are 6 multiple choice questions, A, B, C, and D, okay? Let's look and see what is the best way to answer this question. So in the first instance, I would definitely suggest reading the title here. So we can see here we're looking at scientific publishing, okay? We can see here this small forward introduction, if you like, explains a little bit more about this concept of old ways of publishing scientific research against new ways. Okay, so essentially that's what we're going to be looking at. Okay, so you now have an idea what the topic is going to be about in the article. Okay, and then I would just suggest that you go straight to the first question. And we can see here that in question 31 here, in the first paragraph, so we can see here we've been told where to look for the answer. The writer expresses doubt regarding the part that peer review plays in. Okay, so just looking at that part of the question here, we can make some deductions that are important for how we're going to answer this question. So in the first paragraph, so we've been told where to look, and there are doubts. Okay, problems, okay, in relation to peer review. Okay, so those would be our key words. Okay, so if we went back to the sort of first paragraph, we could look very quickly and see what parts relate to doubt or problems or things that are of concern. Okay, and in relation to peer review. Okay, so let's look at that part first of all, and then we'll come back and check answers here from A to D. So let's see what happens. Here we are in the first paragraph. This is where we're going to find our answer, okay? And we can look through and just look at the first couple of lines. Peer review, so this is what we're talking about. Process of subjecting scientific paper to the scrutiny of others, okay, this is what peer review refers to, is generally held up as a quality assurance mechanism for research. So if you're going to publish a paper, this is what you would have to go through, okay? It professes to be an essential filter, prevents publishing flawed or nonsensical papers, and indeed is often touted as such in reassuring tones. So you can see here how they're talking positively about this means of publishing papers. Okay, reviewing a paper can delay its publication by up to a year. So you might say that that sort of perhaps would be a negative. Is that a price worth paying to ensure the trustworthiness of the published literature? So indeed, the fact that it takes a whole year may well be important. Yes and no. So we've got positives and negatives. And picking apart such issues reveals a great deal about the state of scientific publishing, which is very much in flux. Okay, so we know now what the first paragraph says. So let's go back to the question itself. And let's look at our answers that we can possibly choose from. Provoking changes in the process of scientific publishing, affecting deadlines for publishing scientific papers, ensuring quality of scientific research, reassuring the public about new research. Well, something about the deadlines may well fit with the question of it takes a whole year. Okay, so I think our answer has to be in relation to this part here. Okay, and specifically this part about the fact that the publication could be delayed by a year. Okay, that's worth considering. But then the second question here, is it worth paying to ensure the trustworthiness of the paper? Okay, so we should look and see which of these two parts here. Is it related to the fact it takes a year, or is it related to this question about trustworthiness? Okay, so let's go back to our answers. And you can see here that the peer review plays in affecting deadlines for publishing scientific papers, or does it play a role in ensuring the quality? Well, I would have to say here it is about the quality of the research, the trustworthiness. Okay, it's not the fact that it takes a whole year to publish. Okay, it's a fact that you need that year to ascertain whether the paper is of good quality and can it be trusted. Okay, so that would definitely be my answer here for C. Okay, so you can see here we need to be very careful about what the question says, and then we need to choose very carefully about which of the answers are going to be the right ones. Okay, you can see here that B and C is definitely sort of possible. Okay, but looking closely, you can see here that quality is going to have a more important factor in the question here than time. Okay, let's just look and do another one very quickly. And see what the next one says. What does the writer feel that many scientists need to be reminded of? Okay, so we can assume here that the sort of next question I would say is going to be related to the second paragraph. Okay, usually these are sequential, so you can sort of see here first paragraph, second paragraph, third paragraph. Then we're sort of given in question 34 the line to look at. Perhaps you'll need to look before and after that. Okay. And you can also see here at the end how in the final paragraph you'll find the answers for these lines. So essentially it works paragraph, first question, first paragraph, first question, second paragraph, etc. Okay, so we know where to look. So we should talk a little bit here about sort of time management. Okay, time management here for the reading exam is really quite important. Okay, the 4 reading questions essentially will take you somewhere to probably be about, I would say, about an hour, 70 minutes of the 90 minutes that you have for this reading and use of English paper. Okay. So if you take our sort of 60 minutes, 70 minutes as a whole for parts 5, 6, 7, and 8, okay, I would suggest that you should be spending probably about 18 minutes for each reading question. Okay. We also need to consider as well how many points that you will get for each of these reading questions. Okay. So, for example, here in part 5, the 6 questions will give you 2 points each. In other words, there are 12 points that are available here for this part. Okay. If you look at part 6, there are only 4 questions, 2 points each, and so you will only get 8 points. Okay. But you may well spend 18 minutes, more or less, trying to get these 8 points. Okay, so you have to ask the question, can I obtain more points here in part 5 with my 18 minutes or in part 6? And you probably say, well, part 5 is going to give me more points for the same amount of time. So you need to be very careful with time. Okay, but if we take our 6 questions with 18 minutes, it gives us 3 minutes a question. Okay, 3 minutes, I would say, is sort of enough time for each of these questions to be answered. Okay, if you get to a stage where you are stuck, you don't know, then I would suggest that you move on to the next question and try and answer the next question. And then afterwards, go back at the end and try and answer the questions that you've missed. Okay. So finally, I would say here, looking at the questions, looking at sort of keywords, okay, going to the relevant part of the text and reading carefully, okay, and then looking at our answers, and then from there choosing what is going to be the right answer. Okay, let's move on to part 6, okay. Part 6 here is very simply 4 people, okay, or maybe 5 people sometimes, talking about one particular topic, okay, and we can see here that our topic is about living in London. Okay, so these 4 people, A, B, C, and D, they all talk about, I would imagine, problems that they sort of have come across living in London. Okay, and for each of these 4 people, there are questions here that we need to answer. Okay, now some of these questions are sort of reasonably sort of common. Questions like sharing C's opinion has a different view from A. Okay, sharing A's opinion. Okay, and this other question here is common, expressing a different view from the other 3. Okay, so looking very quickly, we can sort of say, well, in the first question 37, we're going to have to read all 4 people. Okay, see what they say about the comments here about housing situation in London, and one will say something very different to the other three. Okay, in 38, we need to see what C says about public transport and find someone who has the same opinion. In 39, it's the opposite. We want a different opinion from A about multicultural nature of London's population. Okay, so we can see here very quickly what we need to do in relation to each of the questions. Okay, so for example, here in 37, we need to know what each person says, and each person will say something about housing in London. Okay, whether it's good or bad, I would imagine. So let's look at that quickly and see how that plays out. Okay, let's see first of all at A and see what A says about housing. Okay, so first of all, at the beginning, we've got the fact that London is a cruel place. We've got something here about rundown estates. Okay, that's related to housing. Okay, something about harshness and problems. So we can see here sort of negatively worded. Okay, then we've got something else about landlords. We've got something about rent. Shoebox in London will cost you more than a palace. Okay, so we can sort of see here how it's negatively worded. Okay, talking of contempt, she says. Okay, so you can see here how that she's not a fan of housing in London. Okay, let's just remove that quickly and have a quick look at B and see what B says. B is an inventive city, happily embracing London Underground, finding one-bed flats further away from the centre. So here we talk about some housing. Until now, the trend has been to move further out to find a place to live, but it doesn't need to be like that. So again, this is about housing as well. Some of the most interesting work going on in London now is around the politics of scarcity. We need to release spare space, as well as investigate new models of flexible living and co-housing. Okay, so here he sort of seems to be sort of reasonably positive. Okay, he's certainly not as negative as A. Okay, so perhaps we've got a negative A comment about housing, and B looks like it's much more positive. Okay, he talks about this idea we should investigate these different ways of living. Okay, so let's look at C, and we can sort of find out quickly whether sort of our answer is going to be A or B. Okay, and if we look at C, what does C say in relation to housing? Most people can no longer afford to live here. So right from the beginning, it's expensive. Okay. Sad conformity among those that do. Okay. The people living there are essentially tribal and conservative. She talks about the London transport system, which seems to be positive. Okay. And I don't think she says anything else. So it's here from the top that she says sort of negatively, it's an expensive place to live. Okay, which would definitely sort of fit with A, who talks in the same sort of fashion. That, we've got landlords here, we've got the rent, we've got very small places, and it's going to cost you more than a palace. So we can see here how A and C talk very quickly about the negativity of it being an expensive place to live, whereas B is very much a positive. Okay, so my answer is going to have to be that B would definitely be the right answer. We can check D just to make sure, and just look and see if that is the case, because we should see again negativity about housing, and again right from the beginning we can see here decrepit housing stock, overpriced, falling to pieces. Okay, so that fits automatically with what we have with A and C about this idea of it being expensive. Okay, so B is going to be the answer here in relation to one person having a different opinion to the other three. Okay. And then we just have to do the others. We have to find out what C says about public transport system and find the other person who has the same opinion as C. Or in 39, check what A says about multicultural nature of the population of London and find a different view from the other people to what A says. Okay, so again, think about the time that you have for this. Okay, think about the number of points that you have for this. Okay. Right, let's move on to part 7. Part 7 we know is what they call gap fill. You can see here we have 6 gaps in the text. Okay. The text here is about beavers, the animal. Okay. Sort of have a look a bit more closely. We can see here how the beavers play an important role in the water system of Rhode Island in America. Okay, so that's essentially what our topic is going to be about. We've got 6 gaps that we need to fill. Okay, and we know that we have 7 parts to choose, and to choose one of these to put back into the gap. Okay, so I would say here that it's important to read well before the space, understand well what it says, and to read then after the space, and also to read well what it says. Maybe the first 2 or 3 sentences after the space should be looked at. Okay, sometimes you need to sort of read sort of quite a bit further down from the gap to actually find out what the sort of answer is going to be in 41. But looking here very quickly, let's just look and see. Let me just see if I can highlight. See what we can highlight here just very quickly. We can see how it introduces the question of beavers, the number of beavers in America. Okay. 1 second. I'm going to just make it easier to read. Right. Okay. And so it talks about beavers. We can see here how many there are. Okay. It's a keystone species. It's important. Okay. Enriching ecosystems, building dams, controlling water. Okay. Creating ponds. Okay. However, contrast. Okay. So we've got all the positives here, but now we've got a contrast. A study by this American society says beavers doing something more. They are now helping to remove nitrogen that has moved its way through the soil into groundwater and lakes and streams. Okay, so we can see here how this perhaps is not a positive. So positively talking here, but negatively the effect of beavers here. Okay, we have our space. And after the space, we have this comment here. In time, these plants die and decompose, consuming the oxygen from the waters, creating low oxygen levels that kill fish. So again, you can see here how, again, it sort of continues with this negativity. Dying, decomposing, killing fish, okay? But probably the most important point here is the question here about these plants. Okay, my question would be, what plants are these? Okay, so whatever we put in 41, whatever goes here has to mention or have mention of these plants. Okay. So if we go and now check our different parts, we can sort of see here, think about what we've read, okay, the context of what we're reading, okay, and see how each of these fits, okay. If we look at A quickly, we can see here, we talk about this woman here. It talks about her research here, doctoral dissertation, environmental consultant. Might change our attitude to beavers and ponds. There's nothing here about plants. There's nothing here about this negativity that beavers perhaps have. Okay, so A can't be the right answer. Let's look at let's look at B, sorry. At the same time, the specimens were also sufficiently small to be easily replicated, managed and measured for numerous changes. The scientists then added a special type of nitrogen to the soil that allowed them to tell if the nitrogen levels were altered and how. Again, here we have no mention of plants, okay? Specimens here could well be related to laboratory work because we're managing them and measuring them for changes. Okay, so perhaps this is later on where we go into a laboratory. So this is not relevant. Although it does mention here about nitrogen in the soil. Nitrogen levels were altered and how. Okay, so maybe that's going to have reference to something later on. C. Streamside wetlands are one example of such elements. What elements? Okay. Be careful with words like such because they have references to before. Says Professor Gold studies these type of features in his research, but nobody had ever documented the role beaver ponds might play. So again, here we can see here there's no mention of plants either. D. Found in agricultural fertilizers, nitrogen is often introduced to such areas by runoff. eventually traveling to estuaries where rivers meet the sea. Once in the water system, it has been known to cause what is known as eutrophication. This is where a sudden increase in nutrients can cause blooms of algae to grow. So algae is important here because that is a type of plant. Okay, and we can see here that the algae is growing. Okay, we've got this question here about nitrogen runoff, so from the fields into the water, into estuaries, into rivers, into the sea. Okay, once in the water system, it has been known to cause this. Okay, it's not important to know what this means. Okay, what is important is the nitrogen in the water. Okay, and because of this particular process, we get the increase of these nutrients, and the fact that these plants grow. So let's see if D fits here. Now we've found this information. Let's go back to our space. One moment, and let's see if that perhaps fits. So we've got this sort of contrast here that beavers are doing something more, helping to remove nitrogen that has moved its way through soil into groundwater and lakes. Well, that does seem to fit with what it says here now about this nitrogen runoff into the estuaries, into rivers, into the sea. Okay, and that this particular process is causing these plants, algae, okay, to grow. Okay, so I would say that D here is going to fit quite well with 41. Okay, we have context here about what they're talking about, and we have reference to these plants. Okay, then it goes on to say that in time, these plants will die, consuming the oxygen, and this is where the problems come, and they're starting to kill the fish. Okay, so you're having to look sort of a little bit beforehand, understanding well what it says, looking after the space as well. Okay, again, thinking about the context, looking at these sort of words here that will identify comments made in the space. Okay, you need to be looking at sort of pronouns and such words to find reference. Okay, thinking about context is going to be important. Okay, also even thinking about timelines. Okay, maybe before the space, it talks about the morning. After the space, it talks about the evening. So you can probably guarantee that in 41, the space will talk about the afternoon. Okay, maybe timeline becomes important. Okay. Again, it's going to be important in relation to time that you have. Okay, we have 6 gaps here. Okay, and if we look at our sort of 18-minute for each part, okay, the 6 questions here or the 6 gaps, we know we're going to spend about 3 minutes for each. Okay. Again, if you look at it in that sort of context, I don't think it is impossible. Okay. What you can do when you're reading through the different parts here is by the side, make small notes so that you don't have to reread the part again. We know that A was about this woman and her work at university. We know that B was sort of in the laboratory talking about specimens. Okay. We know that C talked about Professor Gold and his research. Okay. We know that D talked about this nitrogen process and the plants. Okay. So if you make a small note here, you can sort of see very quickly and not have to reread all over again. Okay. This part is important because, again, it will give you 12 points. Okay. So I would suggest that perhaps you think about doing these parts first because they are worth so many points. Part 5, it's worth 12 points. Part 7 is worth 12 points. I would suggest perhaps that we spend most of the time, if we can, looking at 5 and 7 because they will give us the most points. Okay. And the last part here, part 8, it's very simply that we will have 10 questions. Okay, we can see our questions here. And typically it's going to be about 4 parts, sometimes 5 parts. Okay. In this case here, it's about the Olympic Games and the sport of squash. Okay, so we would assume that each part here is talking about squash in relation to is it in the Olympic Games or not, or the decision about to include this sport in the Olympic Games. Okay, so before reading A, B, C, and D, I would definitely suggest looking well at each of these questions, okay, and understanding well what each question is asking, okay, and if it's necessary, highlighting keywords because these will give us essentially the answers to be looking for. So, for example, here in 47, we're looking about the fact that the writer finds it not difficult to express emotions. Okay, so not having a problem expressing his emotions, positively or negatively. Okay, that's going to be important for the answer for 47. Okay, is that A, B, C, or D? Okay. 48, ignorance of certain sports. So this person, this writer, does not know about particular sports. He doesn't know about cricket. He doesn't know about rugby or tennis. Okay, and that he expresses this ignorance, that he expresses that he does not know. 49, outline the reasons behind a particular decision. So we're looking for because. These decisions, because, okay, and these are explained, outline the reasons behind, okay. 50, expresses admiration for some of his colleagues. So one of the writers thinks of his colleagues in a positive light. Okay, perhaps he did something good, perhaps he participated in a particular sport, perhaps he was a winner of something, and expressing admiration is a definite positive feeling towards someone. Okay. 51, admit that it had seemed unlikely, so perhaps not possible, that this sport would be chosen. So whatever writer is talking about this particular sport, that it was almost impossible it would be chosen. Okay. So once you've gone through the questions, as you're reading through A, now that you have the questions in your head, it should be relatively easy to look through here and say, aha, this relates to 47, or this relates to 48. Okay. We can see here that we've got 4 sections. Okay. We've got 10 questions. So mathematically, that's going to give us 2.5 answers per part. Okay. So 2 answers for A, 2 for B. Okay. Be careful because it may well be that there are 3 or 4 for A, but only 1 for B. Okay. But more or less, we're going to get at least 2.5 for each. Okay. A decision was made. Okay. So just going through systematically. Okay. And looking for, can I say that A is 49? Can I say that 50 is A? Okay. Once you've done sort of A and B, okay, so when you finished A, you've got some answers here for 2 or 3 of them. Then have a look at B, do the same sort of process again, okay? And then by the time you get to C and D, okay, you're obviously going to have much less and much less choices to make. Okay, so it will get progressively easier just because of the fact that you've got less choices to choose from. So it's important, the time management of this part of the exam, absolutely. Okay, I know people doing the reading part of the exam have problems with time. Okay, you may well even consider doing 5, 6, 7, and 8 at the beginning. Okay, so before you look at parts 1, 2, 3, and 4, that first reading question and then the use of English part, to spend the time that you've got, those 60 to 70 minutes, okay, looking through 5, 6, 7, and 8, they will require you to do more work than you need to do for sort of parts 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you look at parts 1, 2, 3, and 4, the sort of process of answering the different parts is really quite simple and quite quick. Okay. In some cases, it's a question of whether you know or you don't know. Okay. Obviously, you're going to make an answer. Obviously, you're going to put something, even if it's a guess. But for example, in the multiple choice, you've got A, B, C, and D. It's just a question of trying to choose properly or making educated guesses. Okay. For the reading, you're going to have to spend a little bit more time looking carefully, reading through text, reading through answers. Okay. Perhaps you might consider doing the reading parts first. Okay, so think about time management. Okay, think about how the process of answering the questions. Okay, and as I say, maybe you want to look at doing the reading first and then look at use of English afterwards with the 25, 30 minutes that you've got. Okay, so I hope this video was of use. Okay, practicing for this exam is important. Okay, it's certainly worth practicing before you do the exam. Okay, the more that you practice, the more confident you will feel, and it should be sort of you should get to a stage where you sort of feel confident before you actually get to do the exam. Okay, so practice as much as you can. Okay, practice with the time that you are given. Okay, so if it's 18 minutes for part 5, then practice doing part 5 with 18 minutes and see how effective you are with the answers that you get after that amount of time. Okay, so wish you luck. Okay, and we'll do some more videos in the future, and we'll see you another day.